When creating a session object, it's not that easy to test it. Let's try it with our new mySession object, which is just a simple class. It has a constructor. The object itself is going to be a basic hash-based blast reference. So this is the constructor. And then we have two methods. One of them is the login method that gets a username and a password and sets the session. And then another function called logged in that will check whether the current user is currently logged in. So the login method receives these two parameters, username and password, and then there should be something that checks the credentials, but we skip that part. Instead of that, we put in create a hash called session, and then in that session we put the key is going to be the username, and the value is just the current time, so we'll know when the user logged in. And then the logged in method will receive just the username, and then check whether it has if there is a session for that user, so whether that key exists in the session hash, and whether the time passed, so the time between the current time and the original time when the session was created, whether that's smaller than a timeout, than a predefined timeout period. So, and then if that's true, then we'll return some true value because the user is logged in and the session hasn't expired yet. Otherwise, we just return 0. Now this timeout can be any number. We pick here, let's say 60 seconds. But in other systems, it might take weeks or I don't know, even a year to time out a session. Now, how do we test this? If we create a script, let's say called time.t, and then the first thing we have to do is to load the modules. So because we are not using some Perl system, we just use the find bin module and the bin variable in it that points to the current directory, and that will allow us to load the module. Then we load the test more module and plan for one test. And now the first thing for the real test is to load the mySession module, then to create an object, and then to log in. So we call the login method with just username foo and just some password. After all, this in our example is not being checked, so this doesn't matter. And then we check whether it's logged in. So it should be logged in right now. So we call the OK function, is logged in and pass foo. And now if we run this script, then it should just print out OK1. So let's see how it works. Right. So that's okay if your user is logged in. Well, what happens if there's another user, let's call bar, who's not logged in? Then we want to check whether the logged in returns false for that user. So we add just another test case. We also need to update the plan, and we can run the script again. And indeed, we have both OKs. Now, I've just forgotten that it's probably better to add some names to the test units, so it will be easier to see what's going on. So both the first foo being logged in and bar not being logged in has some name now, much better. Now we want to see the timeout. So how can we test the timeout? We just copy paste this example, but we are checking whether foo after 60 seconds is going to be not logged in. But how can we test it? We have to sleep for 60, or let's say better, sleep 61 seconds. And then if you run this test, the first two will be okay as were okay before. Then the test will wait for 60 seconds, and the last one will print okay. But we don't really want to wait 60 seconds, so we just stop the script. And what we can do is reduce the timeout in the actual code to, let's say, 2 seconds. We can handle that. And then the sleep we also have to reduce, let's say for 3 to 3 seconds. We can run the code, and then now we wait for 1, 2, and 3 seconds, and indeed it works. But that's not really a good thing, because in a real application, we don't want to, we can't change the actual code being under test. And maybe it's a much more complex thing, so maybe we don't even have access to that timeout. So how can we test this without changing the timeout, the hard-coded timeout period? Well, there is a module called test mock time, and it provides several functions that can allow us to fake actually the current time. There's one for setting the fixed time, and there is one which we are going to use to set relative time. So instead of sleeping 61 seconds, we just set the relative time to 61 seconds later. That basically means that Perl will lie about the time. We run the test, and voila, it's running very fast and it's testing the code.